Here we go.
At the turn of the 19th century, the fur trade was expanding west. The Northwest Company sent explorers to find an overland trade route to the Pacific. One of them was a young man from Montreal, Simon Fraser. In 1805, at the age of 29, Fraser embarked on an epic journey. He was joined by 2 First Nations guides and 19 French-Canadian voyageurs. 3 years later, he began descending the river that would one day bear his name.
Having made every preparation for a long voyage, we embarked at 5 a.m. in 4 canoes.
Fraser had numerous friendly encounters with First Nations along the river, but locals thought he was crazy. They knew how deadly the river could be.
After passing the first cascade, the canoe was drawn into the eddy. The men had no power over her. It then continued to fly from one danger to another until the whirlpools forced it against a projecting rock. Upon this, the men debarked and saved their own lives. We had to pass where no human being should pass, through the gates of hell.
As Fraser approached the mouth of the river, he came in sight of the village of Musqueam.
The natives began making their appearance from every direction, howling like so many wolves. Several followed in canoes, armed with bow and arrows. We saw nothing but dangers, and directed our thoughts towards home. Here, I must acknowledge my great disappointment in not seeing the ocean, having gone so near it as to be almost within view.
Despite never reaching the Pacific, Simon Fraser's death-defying journey became legendary, and the river which he explored came to be called the Mighty Fraser.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Monday afternoon. My name is Kerrie Niemeyer, and I am the Director of Marketing and Sales for Wells Gray Tours. And we are here this afternoon to focus on a tour we have running this fall in September called Fraser River from Source to Mouth. And this tour will follow the Fraser River from its source near Mount Robson all the way to the mouth in the Strait of Georgia in Vancouver. There are many thrilling experiences on this itinerary, including a helicopter ride to the source and 3 boat trips on the mighty Fraser River. And I personally have not taken this tour, so this afternoon I invited a couple experts to join me. And with me this afternoon, we have our owner, founder, tour director, of course, and he also created this awesome itinerary that you're going to learn more about. And also joining us will be Marion. So thank you, Roland, for being here. And Marion, I'm just going to, she was with us. Just give me 2 seconds. There she is. Marion Weinhold, one of our tour directors, is also joining us. She has led the tour and will be leading the tour this fall. So we're going to chat with her a little bit more about that. Just before we get started, so this tour is called Fraser River Source to Mouth. It is leaving September the 8th. It's a 10-day tour if you are from the interior of BC. For our Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island clients, you would be leaving 1 day earlier, which would be September 7th. And we would be flying you to Kelowna to overnight you in Kelowna and then leaving the tour from Kelowna. And we want to warn you that this tour is half full and selling out quite fast. Last week on Friday, we released our Experiences quarterly brochure. This is a brochure we make 4 times a year. So our summer edition just is hot off the press. Normally in other times we would print this and mail it to you, but we are currently sending it digitally. So you should have received this last Friday by email. And if for any reason you did not get this, please call your local office. We'll make sure you get a copy. And we are busy. Travel is back. We are so excited. The BC Restart Plan has really kicked everyone into gear. There's some amazing places to see this summer, and our summer tours are flying off of our shelves, literally. I can tell you this morning, we have already had 42 bookings. So thank you to all of you who are traveling with us and you're ready to travel. We're so excited. So keep that in mind, and I will give you a little tip that there is a travel savings coupon inside that brochure. So if you're thinking about going on any trips, to book on that by July the 5th, and you'll save some money. Then also today at the end of the webinar, we are going to do a draw for this specific tour. So for the Fraser River tour, we are going to do a draw. So everyone who registered to join us this afternoon, and don't worry if you couldn't join us live or you had technical difficulties, your name has gone into the draw. And we're going to do a draw at the very end for $100 and a $50 travel voucher towards this tour. So lots of ways to save some money. All right, now I'm going to turn it over, and I know Marion wants to just share a couple words. So thank you, Marion, for being with us this afternoon. And is this the first tour you're going to take out this summer?
No, actually, I'm doing one in August, and then Fraser River Source Mouth will be the second. Yeah.
Great.
So I'm absolutely delighted to be with everyone this afternoon. I was just so taken with this tour. If I were to look back on my career with Wells Gray, it would be way up there as highlights of tour directing. Would be Fraser River Source to Mouth. Just fabulous, and I'm so excited about being able to do it again in September. Looking forward to what Roland has to say as well.
Yes, go ahead, Roland. So Roland, I know, is the pioneer in sending people on this tour, coming up with this very unique itinerary. He's going to tell you more, but not very many people have actually ever been to the source of the mouth, and the people that have done it with Wells Gray Tours. So we have some bragging rights there. And he's going to share lots of history about the river. So thank you so much, Roland.
Well, thank you, Kerrie and Marion, and good afternoon, everyone. So nice to see so many people attending our show today and wanting to learn more about the Fraser River. The tour is a favorite for me, and I would love to do it again sometime if I could only wrest it away from Marion, who's done it the last 2 times, but she does it so well. So you'll be in very good hands with Marion on this trip. I did the very first tour after we designed it, and that was in 2001. I actually had the idea while we were on a family camping trip, and I woke up in the middle of the night for some reason, and the idea just popped into my head. And I think it was because American tour operators have been doing the Mississippi River for a long time, calling it source to mouth. And I thought, why don't we celebrate our own river, the Fraser, and then develop the tour around that. But the source of the Mississippi is very easy to drive right to it, and the source of the Fraser is not. Many people think that the source of the Fraser is near Yellowhead Pass, and you can drive right almost to it, but that's not the case. It is about 40 kilometers away from Yellowhead Pass to the south in a roadless terrain that can only be reached by helicopter. So, of course, when we're advertising the tour as source to mouth, we have to take you by helicopter right up there into the tundra. And that's where we'll start our show in a moment. But to put the Fraser into perspective, I think one nice quote to start interest signs that were all over BC's highways starting in the 1960s. And there was one just west of Hope that was called the Mighty Fraser. And this is the words on it. Our past, present, and future are linked with the Fraser. The past saw fur traders, the gold rush of 1858, and early settlers. The present sees waters teeming with migrating salmon, and a highway and railways confined to the gorge carved by the river. The Fraser, beautiful, bountiful, and powerful, must always flow in the pattern of our future. The Fraser River's intrigue is not only its geography, but the vital role it has played in British Columbia's history. So starting with First Nations tribes who lived and worked on its banks long before Europeans arrived, then fur traders such as Simon Fraser and Alexander Mackenzie came to the Fraser and traveled on its waters over 200 years ago. Thousands of miners sought gold on its sandbars in the 1850s. A route for the Canadian Pacific Railway was blasted through the canyons in the 1880s, and Vancouver grew from hamlet to metropolis at the outlet of the Fraser. I'm going to go into my slides now. Just bear with me through a few clicks here. And there we go. So here's a map of the drainage basin of the Fraser, and you can see how much of British Columbia it actually drains, a huge amount of the province. Starting at this tiny spring that drips out of the hillside at Fraser Pass, the river flows northwest around its big bend, because yes, the Fraser has a big bend as well as the Columbia, and that's near Prince George, and then it flows pretty much southwards all the way down to Hope. But it gathers so many different rivers along the way, and you can see the names of those on this map. And then at Hope, the river turns west and empties into the Strait of Georgia just south of Vancouver. Altogether, the Fraser is 1,390 kilometers long, or 854 miles. And its drainage basin is an incredible 85,000 square miles. Now, if you were logged on a few minutes before we actually started, you saw a quick video about Simon Fraser, and this is the man that the river is named for. So he was born in 1776 in Vermont, and by age 16, he was a junior clerk in the Northwest Fur Trading Company. And he moved up the ladder fast, and by 1802, he was a full partner. In 1805 to 06, Lewis and Clark explored the Louisiana Territory in the US and traveled all the way to the west coast of the US. And if you talk to many people in the States, they'll say that Lewis and Clark were the first to make it across the continent. It was actually Alexander Mackenzie in 1792 who traveled partly on the Fraser River and then made his way west to Bella Coola. But Simon Fraser came just a few years after Lewis and Clark. And in 1808, he set out from Fort George, which is now Prince George, with 4 canoes, 19 paddlers, and 2 First Nations men. And he thought he was on the Columbia River. A month after leaving Fort George, they reached the meeting of the Thompson and the Fraser Rivers, and there he paused to consult with the First Nations and find out that the route ahead was really treacherous. In fact, they said it was impassable by water. He named this great river that came in from the east the Thompson for his colleague in the Northwest Company, David Thompson through the Fraser Canyon. And then at Hope, he came to the horrible realization that he was on the wrong river. This was not the Columbia. The river turned sharp west and the valley widened, and soon he realized that he was in tidewater as the Fraser rose and fell gently with the tides. And soon he reached the water, the salt water at Vancouver. It had taken him 34 days to travel from Fort George down to the sea. And then he turned around and he retraced his route all the way back up the river. The Mystery River, the second great river of the West, now bore Simon Fraser's name. So here we are at the source of the Fraser River. It's about a 25-minute flight by helicopter from the Yellowhead Highway to take you up into this alpine area. And there's a small group of our people just getting off the helicopter. So you have about 45 minutes to an hour to look around this area and experience the actual source. The river rises from this little pond. And if you want to actually see the inflow from the pond, you go to a little dripping spring beside the pond. And that's where this picture is taken, with a few people admiring that dripping spring that is the source of the mighty Fraser. And then a short ways from there, you can actually put a foot on each side of the river, straddling the Fraser River. And that's something that not very many people can claim to have done. So we estimate that about 200 people have actually been to the source of the Fraser. The very first was an expedition by beautiful British Columbia magazine in 1985. And then we began going there in 2001. We've had, this will be our 5th tour to the source of the Fraser. So I think it's safe to say that the vast majority of people who've been to the source have been traveling with Wells Gray Tours. So here at the source, the nearest road is about 50 kilometers away. There's no trail to the site. So that's why we fly in by helicopter. And so this tour follows the Fraser River all the way down to its mouth, and you have all sorts of different experiences along the way. Some of our tours go by train through here, and here we're close along the shore of Moose Lake, which is actually the only lake on the entire length of the Fraser River. Overlander Falls. There's several waterfalls on the upper reaches of the Fraser. Otherwise, it is rapids and some pretty turbulent white water in places. Mount Robson is a spectacular peak that is seen from the river about 60 kilometers west of the Yellowhead Pass, the highest mountain in the Canadian Rockies at just under 13,000 feet. And to get a better view of Mount Robson, we go on rafts. So this is the first of 3 boat trips that we take on the Fraser River. It's a gentle float. There is no white water that you'll experience on this, and so very comfortable for most people. And all along this section of the Fraser, you get some terrific views of Mount Robson. People who are intrepid hikers can get a different view of Mount Robson by hiking the Berg Lake Trail. It's an all-day, very strenuous trip up to the lake, and that's a one-way trip because you would normally stay overnight by camping at Berg Lake. But here you're on the backside of Mount Robson, the lesser known side, and you have this beautiful alpine lake with 3 glaciers that come tumbling down On the trail to Burke Lake, you pass Emperor Falls, a very distinctive waterfall with a great spout that comes out as it hits a ledge partway down. Back on the highway, we see Rearguard Falls. And this is the limit of salmon migration coming all the way up the Fraser River. And this low falls is what finally blocks their course. And they'll be spawning in gravel beds nearby. Another section of the train trip, which we do on some of our tours, follows the Fraser River west from Mount Robson through the Rocky Mountain Trench all the way to Prince George. Now at the big bend of the Fraser River is a heritage site called the Hubble Homestead. At this point on the Fraser, you're only a short distance from the Arctic drainage. And in 1905, the Hubble family built a trading post here at the south end of this portage between the Fraser and the Parsnip River. And there they transported goods for early travelers between the Arctic watershed and the Fraser, a distance of 5 miles. But from there, north of there, the water flows all the way through the Peace River, the Slave River, and the Mackenzie River to the Arctic Ocean. And that's the big bend of the Fraser River at the Hubble Homestead, just north of Prince George. Prince George is the metropolis of the north. It was once called Fort George, and it was founded by Simon Fraser in 1807, prior to his expedition down his river. It was named for King George III, who was the reigning monarch at the time. In 1910, there was a real estate boom in expectation of the coming of the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway, being built through Yellowhead Pass and west to Prince Rupert. The population of Prince George today is 78,000 people. It is the 7th largest city in BC. Its industries are mostly forestry and transportation based, and the University of Northern BC is located here. On some of our tours into this area, but not on this particular source to mouth tour, we get on jet boats in Prince George and travel either upstream to the Hubble Homestead, or we on one of our Inside Passage tours in 2022, we will be going down the river to the Fort George Canyon. So that gives an experience right on the Fraser River. West of Prince George is Fort St. James. Simon Fraser founded this trading post as well in 1806, and it became an important outpost of the Northwest Company and later the Hudson's Bay Company after the two were merged. Some of the buildings at Fort St. James date back to the 1880s. And it's a National Historic Site, so Parks Canada operates experiences where you can pretend that you are a trader back in the 1800s, and you go into the trading post and actually bargain with a costumed actor to see how much you can get for your furs. Heading south from Prince George, this stop of interest sign is close beside the Caribou Highway and refers to the bridge in the background where the former British Columbia Railway, built initially as the Pacific Great Eastern, and now it's operated by Canadian National. But it is a very high bridge and was quite a challenge to and was completed in 1952. A side trip from Quesnel on some of our tours goes into Barkerville, and a stop on the way into Barkerville is Cottonwood House, one of the original roadhouses on the Caribou Wagon Road, built in the 1860s. And in Barkerville, the restored Living History Museum, there's all sorts of activities that a visitor can do, including this stagecoach ride around the town. Some of you may remember this reaction ferry across the Fraser River. It's at Marguerite, about 30 miles south of Quesnel. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore because with modern transportation and faster roads, it wasn't worthwhile keeping this ferry going. But it crossed the Fraser River from the Caribou Highway to give access to ranches on the west side of the river. A reaction ferry has no motor, and the pontoons underneath are slanted to catch the current, and then with cables attached to the overhead wires, the current of the river pushes the ferry from one side to the other. So when the Marguerite reaction ferry was operating, we would often stop and then ride as passengers across to the other side and then back again. We're down to Williams Lake now on the Caribou Highway, and that's where the road goes west to Bella Coola. That's another of our tours to Bella Coola and the Chilcotin. But on this tour of the Fraser River, we will be traveling this highway as a short side trip across this bridge over the Fraser and then to Farwell Canyon. Once you get past the Fraser River Bridge and climb up onto the Chilcotin Plateau, there's a panorama of beautiful grasslands and little lakes. This picture was taken on the road into Farwell Canyon. And that's the canyon. It's on the Chilcotin River, which is a tributary to the Fraser. And this section is quite spectacular with hoodoos that have been eroded into the cliffs alongside the canyon. Here is the bridge that crosses the Chilcotin River at Farwell Canyon. So we just drive this far across the bridge and then the coach turns around on the other side. But you have a chance to walk onto the bridge and look at the view from there. And very often, especially in September, when we have the tour, this tour will be there, you can watch the First Nations people fishing in these rapids and catching some really big salmon. On one of our trips, we took a jet boat ride on the Fraser, which went underneath the Bella Coola Bridge and then upriver about 20 miles. Now another more rickety bridge crosses the Fraser River south of Williams Lake, and it leads to the Gang Ranch. This is a side trip that we will not be doing on this particular trip, but we have been to the Gang Ranch a couple of times on our tours. It is rather tricky getting a coach onto this bridge because it is a very tight turn at the side nearest to us. And then there's a load limit on the bridge, which is just enough for an empty coach. So we drop off people at this end of the bridge and then you walk across. Then once everybody's across, the coach drives over empty and then picks up everybody on the other side. And because this road ends at the Gang Ranch, then you do the whole procedure coming back. Ranch. It was founded in 1863 by the Harper brothers of Virginia, and it grew into the largest cattle ranch in Canada with 38,000 acres of land at one time. And there we had lunch at the home buildings of the gang ranch. Back to the Fraser River. Here's a nice beach just north of where Churn Creek enters the river, and that's a provincial park today. Traveling along the Caribou Highway through amongst all the vast numbers of lakes in the Caribou. And many of these lakes have campgrounds and picnic grounds, such as this one at Lac La Hache. The Watson Mansion was one of the beautiful homes built in the Caribou. And this one dates back to 1908, when Captain Geoffrey Watson was a British Army officer who came to Canada and purchased 50,000 acres of caribou land around here. He commissioned a Victoria architect to design this gracious mansion, and with a home like this, he hoped to attract his fiancée to come over from Britain. The mansion was 3 stories high, each room beautifully appointed, many filled with ivory artifacts and other luxury items that the captain had gathered from his journeys all over the world. His ranch had stables for 100 horses, bunkhouses, even a slaughterhouse and a store, and he ran about 10,000 head of cattle. But Captain Watson's fiancée never did see the stately home that was built for her. She heard a story in England about some renegade Indians who were wanted for murder, and decided that the Caribou was a far too dangerous place for her to live. And so she declined his offer to come out here. Watson lived in the house from 1910 until 1914, when he returned to his command during World War I, and he was killed in action in France. After that, the Watson Mansion was never occupied again. And by the 1970s, it was a ruined, vandalized shell which hardly hinted at its original grandeur. In 1978, Henry Block, the owner of the 108 Ranch, donated the mansion to a church, which restored it and operated a youth camp around here. But sadly, in 1985, a chimney fire started and the Watson Mansion burned to the ground. This picture was taken about 1980, after the mansion was restored, and probably looks much like what it did in the few short years that Captain Watson lived here. Some of you may remember the British Columbia Railway. We did a lot of tours from the late 70s until the late 90s, when the BC Rail shut down as a cost-saving measure. It provided service from Prince George down to North Vancouver, and you can actually book segments of it. So we often put tour groups on the most scenic portion from 100 Mile House down to Lillooet. Here is the train stopped at Lone Butte. The Hat Creek House is one of the original roadhouses on the Caribou Wagon Road, and it's still standing and restored to what it looked like around 1885 when it was built. That was the year that the start of the Caribou Wagon Road was moved from Lillooet to Ashcroft after the CPR was built. And so the wagon road was shortened a bit, and this was the first stopping place, because those roadhouses were built typically about 15 miles apart, which was the distance that a horse and wagon or stagecoach could travel between We often tour the Hat Creek House because it is a marvelous look back in time. At Hat Creek House, our Fraser River tour leaves the Caribou Highway and we travel west through Marble Canyon, which has incredible cliffs rising above Pavilion Lake and Crown Lake. This rock face is very popular among people who love doing rock climbing. My father was very much into rock climbing as a hobby, and he was one of the first people to work out a route up this incredible face of Marble Canyon. West of Marble Canyon, we rejoin the Fraser River, and in that section, it's called the Moran Canyon. And then here, just a bit further south, it's the Fountain Canyon. But it's one gorge after another as the Fraser River is squeezed up next to the coast mountains. Here are the Bridge River Rapids, where the Fraser River joins the Bridge River. And here is the BC Railway, or Canadian National nowadays, bridge over the Fraser River at Lillooet. Now this is the old highway bridge, just downstream from the railway bridge, and it carried vehicles into Lillooet for many, many years. But now it is a pedestrian bridge, as it just couldn't carry the volume of traffic, especially after Highway 99 was pushed through the mountains to Whistler. And so this became a footbridge and is still a nice way to get a view of the Fraser River. Now, in the wagon road and gold rush days, there was a strange episode where camels were used on the wagon road. In 1862, one of the packers imported 23 camels from Arizona. These animals could carry about 1,000 pounds compared to a mule's 400 pounds, and it could travel about 40 miles in a day. But there were a lot of problems with using camels in the Caribou. There were sharp rocks on the trail, which cut the camel's feet. They were, after all, a camel is more suited to walking in a desert, not on rocky trails. Camels had a horrible smell and caused other pack animals to panic, really. And camels would eat almost anything, including miners' laundry off the clotheslines. Even unopened tins of food would be gobbled down by a camel. And so they were very unpopular, and many of the travelers on the wagon road were furious at the man who had imported these camels into the Caribou. And so finally, he abandoned the experiment. The camels were turned loose and wandered through the Caribou, probably surprising many a person who had no idea that there were camels in this area. The last one died on a ranch near Westwold in 1905. This strange quirk in BC's history was pretty much ignored until 1980. And that's when this new bridge was built across the Fraser River at Lillooet to replace the single-lane suspension bridge. And this bridge was named the Bridge of the 23 Camels in memory of this peculiar experiment. Traveling up the Bridge River from Lillooet, you reach Carpenter Lake. It was dammed in 1960 to create Carpenter Lake, which is 30 miles long. And the river was then diverted through a tunnel to the south and dropping quite a distance down through Mission Mountain to the next valley to the south. And this power was developed in the initially in the 50s and then in the 60s after the dam was completed, and it became the largest source of power in British Columbia until the Bennett Dam was completed. And some of you have been to Tyak's Resort, which is also up on the Bridge River Valley, north of Carpenter Lake. And we have a tour every fall that stays a few nights at this beautiful lodge on Tyotin Lake. Another view of the British Columbia Railway, and unfortunately the passenger service that is no longer operated. But here is a section of track along Seton Lake, just west of Yellowhead. Now we're on the further south, and this is the Thompson River. And it flows through a spectacular canyon with the Trans-Canada Highway and both Canadian Pacific and Canadian National Railways. This section is called the Rainbow Canyon with all the colors of the rocks. Just downstream from here, the Thompson River joins the Fraser River at Lytton. And the very distinctive difference in colors, the muddy Fraser, which has only the one lake almost up at its source, and then the Thompson River on the right, which is a clear blue stream coming out of the gigantic Kamloops Lake. And so all the sediment that is carried down from its glacial sources drops out in the lake and leaves the Thompson as a nice clear stream. Down in the Fraser Canyon, there's the two railways that crisscross. Because the Canadian Pacific was there first, it took the easy side of the canyon. And then when the Canadian National was built in the about between 1912 and 1915, it had to cross the river also to reach the opposite side. So these are the twin bridges of the railways at Cisco. Hell's Gate is included on many tours that we have through the Fraser Canyon. You ride the aerial tram down from the highway to a complex of buildings close beside this narrowest point on the Fraser. We often have lunch there, and there's various exhibits about the history of the Fraser Canyon. You can also walk out onto the pedestrian bridge that you see on the left side. Further downstream is the old Alexandra Suspension Bridge, which was built in 1926 after the previous bridge was destroyed by a flood. You can't easily get to this bridge anymore. The parking area beside the Trans-Canada Highway has been closed because the trail going down to the bridge crosses the CPR tracks, and apparently the railway wasn't too keen on having so many tourists walking across its tracks to get to this bridge. But it's still there, and probably the easiest way to see it nowadays is from the modern highway bridge just downstream, where you can look and see this historic site. Buzzum was a little village just south of the Trans-Canada Highway's crossing of the Fraser River, and often a joke because of its unusual name. This picture was taken in the 1940s, showing the gas station and coffee shop and store at Spuzum. But after these buildings were taken down, a newer store was built on the site. And there were signs that went up at each end of the parking lot. At one end, it said, "Welcome to Spuzum." And at the other end of the parking lot, it said, "Thank you for visiting Spuzum." So it attracted a lot of photos of those rather funny signs. When you get down to Hope. A short side trip leads to the Quintet Tunnels, or the Othello Tunnels as they're sometimes known. You can also reach this site from the Coquihalla Highway. This used to be the tunnels of the Kettle Valley Railway when that line was built through the Coquihalla Pass in 1915 and 16. And so these 5 tunnels were the solution for getting the railway through this very narrow gorge. So there's 5 tunnels and 2 bridges. So nowadays, with the rail lines gone, you can walk through all of these tunnels and across the bridges, getting a view of the turbulent Coquihalla River below. We stop at the Kilby Historic Site. This is a grocery store that operated for many years at the mouth of the Harrison River. And today, as a National Historic Site, it has been restored to the way it looked so many years ago. You can't buy anything in the store anymore, but the tour shows you what a grocery store of that era would have looked like. We stay overnight at Harrison Hot Springs on the Fraser River tour. We're usually in the East Tower, which is the one on the left, where every room has a view of Harrison Lake. And of course, the hot springs are a wonderful way to soak away your cares while you're staying at the Harrison Hotel. We take a boat trip on the Fraser River. We start at Mission and then travel up the Fraser to the Kilby store at the mouth of the Harrison River. It's about a 2-hour tour on the river with a naturalist. And this is a section of the river that the highways are well away from the banks. So you get an interesting experience traveling through this section of the river that not too many people see, and hopefully spotting some wildlife and fish life along the way. Brattle Falls cascades down the mountain to the south of the Trans-Canada Highway, and a short walk leads you right up to the very base of the falls. Another stop that we make is at Westminster Abbey, beautiful cathedral on the mountain above Mission. Fort Langley was built by the Hudson's Bay Company in 1839 as a strategic trading post on the Fraser River. It operated until 1886. By the 1920s, most of the buildings had been dismantled or burned, and by the 1920s, there was only one building left on the site, which was the Hudson's Bay Storehouse. Fort Langley was declared a National Historic Site in 1923, and in the years after that, culminating in the 1950s and 60s, it was completely rebuilt with new buildings that looked just like the plans of the original Fort Langley. So rather like Fort St. James and Barkerville, other historic sites of BC, you can experience this as a living history museum with costumed actors carrying out the roles that would have been performed back in the 1850s or so. We stayed 2 nights at the Inn at the Quay in New Westminster. And this quite unique hotel is built on a pier jutting out into the Fraser River. And so very appropriate for our tour with the theme of following the river from source to mouth. We also have a lot of other tours that stay at the Inn at the Quay because it's a very popular hotel. Here's a view of the Fraser River from one of the rooms built, every room has a view of the Fraser River. Here, looking downstream to the Alex Fraser Bridge. So here the Fraser River has quieted down and meandering out into its huge delta, the city of Vancouver that has grown up between Burrard Inlet and the Fraser River, and now the third largest city in Canada. Other than the name Fraser River, Simon Fraser is not remembered by too many place names in British Columbia, despite his great contribution to exploration. Simon Fraser University was built in 1963 and opened to classes in 1965, and honors the work that Simon Fraser did in his great expedition of 1808. At the inn at the quay, we board the paddle wheeler that takes us down the last part of the Fraser River. It's about a 3-hour trip on the river on those last 18 miles, right out to the outlet of the river into the Strait of Georgia at Steveston. It seems appropriate that you see the last of the Fraser River by boat rather than by taking a road out to Steveston and looking at the river from the shore. And so it's quite a fun experience with a historian on board who talks about the history of the river during our journey down to salt water. So that's the delta of the Fraser, where it splits into multiple channels as it flows through New Westminster and Richmond, and finally reaches the ocean. Captain Drake and Captain Cook missed seeing the Strait of Juan de Fuca during their expeditions centuries ago. Captain Vancouver in 1792 explored the strait and Puget Sound in 1792. The same year, a Spanish captain, Narvaez, was told to follow Juan de Fuca's strait to its end, and he passed the entrance to Puget Sound, then turned north, threaded his way through the Gulf Islands, and then saw an incredible sight, a vast brown stain lying upon the sea. It was obviously a huge river that came into the ocean nearby. He called it Boca de Florida Blanca. By this time, his crew was running out of food and his ship was leaking, and he fled up the west coast of Vancouver Island to Nootka, mentioning his news of seeing this great river simply as an aside. Narvaez received scant pay and no fame at all for his discovery of this great river. And as far as I know, there's no significant place names that recognize his discovery of what we now call the Fraser River. And it was after that discovery, it was another 16 years before Simon Fraser came down his river to this same spot at the mouth. At the beginning of this tour, your tour director, Marion, on this trip, she will collect a bottle of water from the dripping spring up at the source of the river. And that bottle of water is carefully carried all the way down the Fraser River throughout this tour as we make our way downstream on the Fraser. And then when the paddle wheeler reaches the mouth of the Fraser, Marion will pull out this bottle of water and hold a water ceremony and pour that water into the ocean. So I'm sure that our journey will be a lot faster in the waters of the source, making its way to the ocean, because we do it in 8 days. It's quite an emotional ceremony, surprisingly, because many of our customers who've done this before say that they're almost drawn to tears with this special occasion, and with some appropriate readings from Bruce Hutchison's wonderful book that is called The Fraser, published in 1950. So here's the water ceremony, and here's the end of our journey down the Fraser River. So thank you very much. Back to you, Kerrie.
Yes, that was great. Thank you, Roland. A lot of history, lots of spectacular scenery along the way, and touching so many places throughout BC. So I think it's going to be really interesting. And I know Marion has led the tour and is leading the tour this summer. And do you have any highlights you would like to share with us, Marion? You're mute. There you go.
Okay, I also want to thank Roland. That was absolutely fabulous. It rekindled my excitement for this tour, and hopefully it has whetted the appetite of a number of you. It is really a fantastic tour. It's basically what BC is all about, with the geography and the geology and the human history, why we are here. It's so much of that is connected to the Fraser, and I personally think if you live in BC and you are able to, you should be taking this tour. It's absolutely fabulous. And as Roland said, also, it is unbelievable how fond you get of a river. You lose it for a little bit on this highway, and then when you see it again, oh, there it is. Oh my goodness, I missed you, Fraser River. It's yeah, it's a super exciting tour, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be doing it again.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, so we are filling up very quickly. There are some seats, and we released our brochure. I mentioned this at the beginning, so we've been very busy. So if you are thinking about booking, definitely recommend doing it sooner than later. And to help you save some money towards this tour, we're going to do a draw now for 2 travel vouchers, one for $50 and one for $100. So I'll just share my screen here. I've got all your names entered into the draw who registered with us. All right, so hopefully everyone can see this. Marion, how's that? You can see the screen turning there?
Yes, I can.
Great. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and spin the wheel, and we're going to go for the first one is for the $50 travel voucher. So here we go. All right, so our first winner is Pamela Jenkins. So I have your information in the registration form, so I will make sure to touch base with you. And you can either call the local office. Our offices are open now by appointment only. But I will mail this voucher out to you, so you don't necessarily have to go to the office. We'll send it to you in the mail. But if you do want to come visit us at the office, just go ahead and you can make an appointment at your local office. So we're really excited to have people coming in and getting to see all your beautiful faces again. Okay, so we're going to draw for the second voucher. So this will be for $100 towards the Fraser River tour. Here we go. Okay, so we have Brenda and John O'Hara. So you are the winners for the $100 travel voucher. Hopefully that's some good news for our winners out there. So we will get in touch with you, or you can get in touch with us, we have all your information, but I just want to say thank you on behalf of Wells Creek Tours for joining us this afternoon. Roland is off this week on Wednesday, leading our first tour out the gates here since last year. So we're, yeah, I think pretty exciting. He's going to take the Wells Gray Park tour on Wednesday. So have a safe and happy trip, Roland. Stay cool. It's going to be a hot week and weekend ahead, I've heard.
Really looking forward to the trip, and we have a full tour going of 20 people, which is typically our limit on the Wells Gray Park tour. And in this heat, looking forward to standing at close to all these waterfalls that we're going to see. So should be great.
Yes, that mist will keep you nice and cool, the waterfall mist. That's right. So everyone, thank you again. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll wish you safe and happy travels and hope to see you all very soon.
Bye.
Bye.